right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Link's planning series here on twitch.tv. I don't know why I'm introducing it this way. I just felt like giving it a more formal introduction at this time than my usual just, hi, hello, stuff, things, which is amusing because I am starting 17 minutes late. Apologies for the delay. Good evening, Wolf Mom. Yep. Audio and music on both platforms, and I'm seeing captions come through, so stuff, things, and most of all, nonsense. That is what we go for, what we strive for here on this stream. Stuff and nonsense. And look, it's the head of stuff and nonsense, me, myself, and I. Captions and audio. Awesome, awesome. All right. So, what we are here to talk about today, as I slowly kind of lean back and get back into the groove. It's been a little bit of a crazy couple of days. I just guested on a podcast yesterday, Swords and Boards. You should be able to check out that video, that podcast, when it comes out on their channel here soon-ish. I also just got back from helping run masquerade events at Chicago TARDIS up north. And it's a full holiday weekend. The holiday season is in full swing with many, many plans, and hopefully you have places and people to celebrate with. And basically, that's part of the basically, and hopefully basically we may be able to give you games and interesting things to play with and possible ideas for things to do with friends at Christmas parties or other events, or maybe just new things to do in the upcoming year as we throw 2024 into the dustbin and look forward to 2025. Ha. Phantom of the Opera strikes again. Well, basically, we are dealing with capes and capers this week, so, it's somewhat of basically the Phantom has a mask and a cape, and that's kind of leads into what we're looking at here. We're looking at, actually, what year is Phantom of the Opera take place? I suddenly can't remember. Oh well. Looking for the segue. Thank you. In any case, this is the 1920s RPG we're talking about today, which is Capers. There we go. Excellent timing, Streamlabs timer bot. It is 1881, nowhere near the 1920s. Never mind. It's fine. In any case, basically, we're looking at Capers, which is by Nerdburger Games. Looks like this. It is superpowered gang of gangsters in the Roaring Twenties, and so it is basically set during that traditional era of idea of prohibition, of speakeasies, of flappers, flappers and gangsters and guys on the take, casinos and gambling, Charlestons, and all that stuff. Basically, the early part of It's a Wonderful Life. And all that fun stuff. So, basically, it's an interesting era to be playing around with. Basically, it's also definitely an interesting era to be playing superheroes in. The best part about the internet is nobody has to know if you're terrible at Charleston or not. You can claim it. You can claim it all you want, and no one will make you prove it or back it up. I am wearing my appropriate Christmas superhero sweater, so there's that. So, what is Capers? Basically, the idea behind Capers, the basic backstory is pretty much relatively straightforward. It's, hey, World War I just happened, 1920s are happening, Prohibition is happening, and then superheroes are starting to show up. And you go through, basically, they've got some of the usual X-Men-like things in terms of, hey, people with weird powers show up, and therefore you've got registration and things like that. But for the most part, they're just playing it. They're playing it relatively they're playing it relatively straight in terms of basically people with superpowers exist. They're not basically until they start to break the law. They're not hunted. There is a registration. Pardon me while I crack a soda. Um, but for the most part, these people aren't feared and hunted. And basically have to keep their identity secret and buried away, unless you choose to play it that way, and you can. Um, but for the most part, basically, it's kind of basically it's played kind of basically straight, as it were. Basically, the big focus is kind of on the idea of the fact that, hey, you're playing basically gangsters are the obvious touch point. Because it's set during Prohibition, it's set during that big upswing of organized crime. Basically, speakeasies and all of that provide a perfect place for superheroes to kind of basically take part in, whether they are gangsters again, basically hiding out for the law, trying to push booze and hooch and things like that under the noses of corrupt cops and things like that, or you're playing good guys trying to they basically fight against the organized, basically fight against the machinery of organized crime, or you're just basically trying to get along, as it were. All of that is basically available to you. Basically, you have 1920s. You've got this period of time between the two world wars, so patriotism isn't a big swing, so you don't have a big push for we've got to fight wars or anything like that. It's mostly internal focused. It's mostly just kind of, hey, people are trying to have a good time, spending money, economy's on the upswing, or mostly now. Basically trying to deal with the right to basically women have the right to vote in this world in the 1920s, and so you have all of that organized and moving forward. And so basically you've got the flapper movement, you've got Art Deco everywhere. It's a good setting. Basically, it's a good place to kind of have a superhero kind of setting, because bank robberies, basically everyone kind of associates, basically, you've got the gangsters basically holding up bank robberies and things like that. So that's a perfect place for superheroes to show up, and basically whether they're robbing the bank or they are there to stop it, as it were. So basically the interesting thing, basically kind of the lead I'm kind of burying, as it were, is that to go along with this gambling and casino theme, basically Nerdburger has basically come up with an alternative method of basically determining random dice. And that is the fact that rather than actually rolling dice, every player has a standard set of 52 cards. Basically, your traditional poker deck is basically how they call it. 50 cards, 2 jokers. Excuse me. And so you've got all of that. Basically, that is how you deal with game resolution. Is basically you take if you look at the character sheet here, let's pop that up. You've got your ability scores, like you've got basically charisma, agility, perception, expertise, resilience, and strength. You've got skills, which can be like deception, guns, insight, and sense. And you're adding those together to get a number, and that number tells you how many cards you're drawing off of the deck to determine basically whether or not you succeed or pass at the test. So that's relatively straightforward. Basically, you pick it. Basically, there is a number between 1 and essentially 13. Actually, 2 and 13, since aces are treated as high in this system. And so basically you draw cards, and you basically check to see if you get the number over the thing. But wait, there's more. in addition to the card, there's basically, as you know, in a poker deck, all the cards have 4 suits. And so they've also ranked the suits as well. Um, Basically, you can see down here, basically by damage, you can also infer from this uh, what the ranking is as well. Clubs being the lowest, then diamonds, then hearts, then spades. Um, and that gives you the order of basically how good this, basically how successful you are. If you remember back, we've talked about a lot of different RPGs and things like that that have had basically, rather than your D&D and your Pathfinder's relatively straightforward all or nothing success system. Either you succeed or you fail, or maybe sometimes they'll have a crit success or a crit failure. A lot of basically there are basically there's been a rise in systems, especially lately, that deal with partial successes, like we've talked about. Basically, Blades in the Dark being the obvious example of that. In terms of you're rolling a single d6 in Blades in the Dark, and 6 is absolutely successful and 1 is an absolute failure, and then 2 and 3 basically are failures, basically are just straight failures, and then 4 and 5 are successes with complications. Same thing is going on here, where if you succeed with a spade, cool. Basically, you're doing great. You're succeeding incredibly well. If you're going with a heart, basically, or maybe a diamond, your success is okay. Basically, it's a success you wanted, and a club is a success with complications. The usual, you're picking a lock, and maybe it's either the lock pick breaks, or you make a lot, but it takes you more time than you were expecting, or basically you've made a lot of noise, or you've damaged the lock, and now the door can't be locked again. Things like that are your usual successes with complications that you might have in a system. And then if you don't make the target number, then you've got varying shades of failure, where with the spade is failures, but basically there's something, you might get something good out of it. Maybe there's something salvageable you could pull out of it. Your hearts and diamonds are now just straight failures, and then your club is, oh gosh, this is bad. So now you've got that kind of gives you an interesting resolution system right there, in terms of, oh hey, basically it's another way of doing the Blades in the Dark D6, where you have varying degrees of flavor, but gives it a little bit wider range and things like that. But making it even more interesting, and the last little twist for this system here, is not only are you you have the number of card draws that you are given by your skill plus your stat, as it were. But basically that last little twist is the fact that you have to decide when to stop. You draw cards until you say stop, up to your limit. So if you have 4 cards, you can stop at one after the first card, the second card, to the third card. You can't go backwards, though. You're stuck with whatever you pull. So if you're like, oh, this is basically the first card I draw gave me a success, but it's a club success, so maybe I want to keep going and see if I can't get a heart or diamond success, or maybe if I'm really lucky, pulling a spade success. But do I take that risk? Because I can't go back. And so if the next cards I draw aren't successful at all, then I've given up a success for nothing. And so it's this, basically now you've got to push your luck element, which of course 1920s gambling, speakeasies, basically that whole idea of everything in life is you're pushing your luck. Again, basically, do I stop here or risk it? Yep, basically press your luck, basically all of that great things. And of course this applies for not only the players but the GM as well. So everybody is playing that game of, ooh, basically, is that good enough? Do I want to, or do I not? Do I keep going? Oh, basically tricky. And basically that mechanic basically resolves in interesting ways as well, because now You've got that mechanic right there. And then adding on to that mechanic is, hey, what if we're doing if I'm facing off against somebody else and I'm doing an opposed roll, as it were. In other systems, it's just roll 2 dice, and whoever got higher wins. Yay. As long as basically with various modifications of, oh, hey, I'm slightly higher because my skill is better, therefore my roll is better, etc. But now you're doing this in that press your luck situation where you're both turning up a card and you're both looking at it going, oh, okay, I'm succeeding. Basically, I'm succeeding, but only barely, and I'm succeeding with a club. Do I keep going to try to better it, or do I do I look over, you have far more decks of playing cards. Huh. That's because 20, as much as 20 is in your name, I always find it weird that you have somehow survived with only one gaming set. Like, you are an outlier, basically an outlier of a TTRPG player. You have managed to survive with just one set of dice. It is basically your patience is to be applauded. But back to basically that competitive idea, is the idea of the fact that you're like, okay, I can see what the other player is, and now it's a back and forth kind of press your luck situation where you're going, oh, do I want to push it? Do I want to push it because I can see what they're doing, and you're kind of egging each other on, and once somebody stops, they're done. You can't undeclare your stop just because they've kept going and pulled better. You have to accept that if you stop, you have to basically take what you want. You have to take that. So it adds an interesting element to that as well. And of course, basically the interesting thing when you're dealing with a deck of cards is the fact that it's a deck of cards. It's a known quantity. You know the fact that there are 13 cards of each suit. There are the 2 jokers. And there are basically you know how basically, and you can tell how the numbers have worked, and you can be like, hey, basically you can basically make that decision right there. You're like, oh, okay, I think I could push my luck on this because I've drawn a lot of bad recently. A lot of my pulls have been low or clubs, so now I'm pushing for it, and now I can push for. Basically, I can make that chance. I can take that chance because, hey guys, I think I've got a good success coming. Basically, it's worth the risk for me to try it. Like, yeah, it's a hard thing, but I haven't drawn any face cards for a while. You can keep going. But of course, basically, those jokers are in there. Basically, jokers are, of course, exactly what you might do. Basically, you designate one as a good one and one as a bad one. And good jokers auto-succeed. Bad jokers auto-fail. And basically both of those shut down the draw at that point. So if you pull a bad basically, there's always an element that you can whammy, as it were. So basically, those jokers are always lurking there, and you have to worry about them, about drawing them, because they'll kill any check you're doing. So it's a cool little situation where you're having to deal with, okay, how much do I press my luck? I know how much I can press my luck in this situation because I know how the deck works. And so card draws and basically dealing with a card draw is an interesting way of dealing with it, because it somewhat it helps you deal with a little bit of that wild probability that you get in TTRPGs. Now you can have just that little bit more certainty in terms of, oh, okay, yeah, I can push it. I've gotten some of the bad cards out of my deck. I can push it. Or, ooh, guys, I should do something a little bit easier, a little bit tamer. I shouldn't risk myself because I know I've got a bad draw coming up. And of course, Basically, it's a superhero game, which means you have varieties of superpowers, and we can talk more about that in a bit. But one of those superpowers, obviously, basically now you've got the opportunity to mess around with those superpowers and have like probability, basically manipulation, which means you can start going through your deck and basically sorting cards and changing orders and things like that, and actually being able to basically represent luck that way. So you can manipulate probability and actually be manipulating probability, as it were, because you can actually pull the next three cards that basically that a person was going to draw and rearrange them or put them on the top or bottom or play stuff like that. And so it actually makes basically it actually can basically make sense in a term for basically in terms of, oh hey, this is actually mechanically makes sense, as well as being able to basically mechanically have it work, as opposed to another game where you get to roll a d20 twice and you don't know what's going to happen because, hey, you're rolling a d20 twice and they can roll 2 1s, they can roll 2 20s, and there's nothing you can actually, basically you can change the odds by rolling with advantage. And there's 6,000 YouTube videos that will talk to you about basically how rolling multiple dice to actually adjust your probability and things like that. But it's a lot easier to understand if it is draw 3 cards, look at them, put them back in whatever order, or in this game, put them back in whatever order, and now you essentially have seen the future. You've manipulated the luck. You can basically, the player knows exactly what's going to happen next, even though, but it's still a random event. Basically, the 3 cards on top are still random, but something you can't really do with a die is randomly pick 3 numbers and then randomly arrange those 3 numbers. I mean, you could, but it isn't as neat and nice as having card draws, basically having a deck of cards to do that. The last fun thing they do with it is the fact that they also have basically they have that idea of basically kind of the you're seen in that movie where everyone's got their guns off and everyone's looking at each other, and so they have what is known as, before you can choose to whether or not this happens as a GM. It's not guaranteed, but there's something called a standoff, and what a standoff does is basically, normally when you roll for initiative in this game, or draw for initiative as the case may be, you're going to draw a card and look at basically and be like, okay, basically you're going to draw your number of things and pick the right number and be like, oh, okay, here basically, here's my initiative, as it were. Whereas basically, so what basically in here it is, you go 3, 2, 1, and then everybody chooses either to flip the top card or pull it towards them. If you flip the top card, that's another choice you have for initiative, is that top card you flipped. If you pull it towards you for initiative, now it's an additional card that you can use during one of your traits, one of your actions that you take during basically take during the game. So essentially, it's giving you a bonus. You're getting yourself ready. You're getting yourself psyched up, and so you get that little extra bonus. And then you do that twice more. But basically, at the time in the middle, the second round, basically you get 3 rounds of this. But the second round, you can, in addition to either taking the initiative or basically keeping an extra card for a trait, you can instead basically take an action that essentially you might do during a standoff. Either basically tell you guys go for the guy on the left. Basically, you get a sentence to one of your allies, or you could say something to your foes, or you can intimidate them and be like, y'all want to back down now before something bad happens. You can actually attempt to intimidate them during this phase, or you can try to stare them down and figure out what their weaknesses are using a perception check, or you can basically kind of use one of your powers that affects you. You can give yourself your buff during this time period, kind of basically take this chance to center yourself and use your powers and activate them and get ready for the upcoming fight. And so basically, the card, basically you get that cool little mechanic there, basically with the cards, basically being able to hold a roll, as it were, and be able to throw it in sometime later with the standoff. So all of that is basically neat and interesting, and I like the way that they do that. Basically, cards basically cards are an interesting way of dealing with probability. Dice are basically like dice are the basic, basically not the basic way, but the default way that a lot of systems deal with it. Basically, board games, TTRPGs, you name it, dice are going to be your standard way of resolving these things. Cards are basically systems that lead more into cards are more interesting from the standpoint of, hey, okay, here's how probability is going to work out. And having a no, basically you still have that kind of a same bell curve in terms of, okay, it's a standard set of probability, assuming you shuffle well. Basically, these cards are going to get drawn, these numbers are going to show up, you're going to have your averages, etc., etc. But because it's a known set and a limited set, rather than randomly generated each time and not relate basically past success is no indication of of future results. So basically, just because I rolled a 20 last round doesn't mean I can't roll a 20 again. Nothing stops that from happening. But in basically a game with a card deck like this, if I draw an ace, I know my odds of drawing an ace again have gone down. I've got one ace out already, so now I can plan for the fact that, hey, I'm not as lucky as I used to be here. I've used up some of my luck in this encounter. I've got to plan for that. I've got to deal with that. Or, hey, I'm on an unlucky streak. That's guaranteed to change. As we keep going, Lady Luck will eventually show back up for me. Things will balance out. Probability will eventually write itself in my favor. I can't roll 7 ones in a row if I'm drawing cards from a deck. But that can happen whenever you're rolling, basically actually making rolls. And so it can change the way the game feels, and the push your luck element it kind of definitely fits in with that 1920s superhero type vibe. Like the pushing your luck thing is basically great for gambling and casinos and gangsters, works great for that. And for superheroes, you get to have those moments where a player can be like, hey, God, basically my strength is waning. I don't think basically you guys are going to have to pick it up, or basically you're digging deep in the middle of the fight to pull. I think we can pull this out, guys. I think my lucky streak and my luck, good luck is coming around. I can feel it. I'm going to step up and basically take some risks because I know that I can succeed, and it gives you definitely more of a cool superhero type feel of. Basically, yeah, I've been down, I've been battered around, but I know my luck is changing. I know that I can stand up and basically take the risks because the odds are back in my favor, as it were. So basically, it does a great job of basically kind of adding that element to changing it for the game. The last element that they do add, basically, of course, you have to have some reason to have poker chips on the table. If you're doing a 1920s gambling type game, you're playing with playing cards, you've got to have a reason to have poker chips. And so the reason why you get poker chips in this game is essentially similar to inspiration or hero points and other systems. It's the idea, it's something called Moxie. You're getting Moxie for for those great pulls on diamonds, not diamonds, sorry, spades. Those great spades rolls are giving you those kind of bonuses. Success with a boon doesn't necessarily mean you get a Moxie. It can mean you get a Moxie, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get a Moxie. I don't know how people can drink it. But basically, and so basically, and Moxie lets you pull stuff. Basically, lets you do things like, hey, I get an extra card draw, or basically maybe I will basically get more damage or less damage. Maybe I'll get an extra. Maybe I'll get a better benefit out of this roll that I did. The other interesting, basically, the other kind of interesting two things it does that manipulate probability are you can recall a card or reshuffle your deck. So if you've drawn basically through a bunch of high face cards, like I've pulled all face card spades, so now you know that the rest of the basically for the rest of what's going on, you're not going to have great luck because you've blown through all your good cards. You can choose to spend that to basically reshuffle your deck and reset your luck, as it were. You can also recall a card, which means the fact that it kind of helps mitigate somewhat the push your luck aspect, in the fact that spending a Moxie will allow you to go back to a card you passed up previously and choose that card. So you could push your luck a little bit harder. You're like, oh, okay, that's a heart, but I wonder if I could pull a spade and still succeed. And as you can take that extra draw and be like, oh no, that was basically the two of clubs. I'm failing horribly, and it's going to be terrible. I can spend a Moxie and go back to my previous card, which was working, or at least was less bad. So basically, that can help mitigate your bad luck from that standpoint. In terms of powers and things like that, basically it's got your fairly traditional kind of a point-based power system. You've got minor powers and major powers. Basically, powers can be it can be more or less points depending on how powerful or less powerful they are. They can have boosts to them, which can give extra abilities. Basically, you've got all your traditional fun stuff like acid stream, alter form, body armor, bone and organ shifting, which is there to basically just give you those interesting kind of abilities. Dimensional pocket, hypnosis, power sharing, that probability we talked about earlier, weather manipulation, and all those are the minor powers. And then major powers, you can get all sorts of weird stuff like goo generation. Everybody loves a little bit of goo, right? Invisibility, super expertise, super charisma, basically all your super skills, mimic, dimension step. Yes, goo generation. You secrete viscous, sticky goo from your hands. As you do. I don't know why that would be weird. Who doesn't have goo manipulation? Who doesn't want goo generation? You can throw goo balls at people. You can climb on walls. You can make ropes and swing from it. Hey, basically goo manipulation is kind of like Spider-Man, It's just what that goo is. They do also basically, it's not in the quick start guide. But basically, from what I remember, it's not in the quick start guide, but it is in the main book. They do have rules for essentially ways that you basically non-powered people can get superpowers. They essentially go into a little bit more of the science behind it. Okay, basically there's a weird element that basically element molecule thing that generates superpowers, and therefore basically a shot of it will give you superpowers. They've developed anti-shots which will take away your superpowers. They have weapons and guns that will do similar things. You can get suits and things like that. So you basically, if you're really like, hey, I want to create a regular person who has superpowers but only through equipment, basically that system is there basically for your Iron Man, for your Batman, all of that sort of stuff. And so you can play out those systems as well. But let's talk basically now. We've kind of gone through most of what we need to talk about in terms of how the system works, and to kind of focus in on basically how I would plan a superhero game out in Larlink. This wonderful system right there. Um, as such, basically, so let's go ahead and create a new campaign. Basically, we'll base this on the Quick Start game that's in the Quick Start guide or is available for free for download, called Rivals. And we'll go ahead and pull an image for the cover for that. Try to set the tone for it. Let's go ahead and upload that image. Papers. Rival color. I don't know if I have. We'll just dump that in home for right now. Guns. Vintage, 1920s. Shootout. Okay. Aim of a 1920s. It's just 1920s cards, not really vintage if it's 1920s. And let's go ahead and add that in there. Campaigns, capers, cover. Boom, there we go. You can see how that looks right there. Kind of a fun little, basically, fun little image there, though. Pistol, basically, Federal Oats makes kids strong. Sam's headache powder. All right. So the interesting thing with superheroes, and it's kind of in any urban type of campaign, is the idea of the fact that you're kind of dealing with stuff that people are familiar with. Basically, you're dealing with the idea of the fact that this is basically stuff that most people at least have some passing familiarity to. So if I describe a room in a house, basically if I give it a bedroom, you're going to expect certain things to be in there. If I describe it as a living room, you're going to expect other things. Basically a bar, basically a street, things like that. Basically a lot of times you have ideas. Basically you can click with those a lot easier than you would with necessarily like a medieval street. You're like, oh, okay, there's probably a street. Basically like basically you kind of lose sight. You're like, okay, I basically understand it, but it's going to be mud and there's going to be horses, basically people, and there might be like stalls or something like that. It's a little bit harder to latch on the further back you go in time or the further forward you go into space and science fiction. So, but the idea basically when you're dealing with this, you've got a little bit more to work with in terms of, hey, I know what basically it is. Basically, I know what's going on. Sorry, I'm pulling up a description of basically what this adventure is while I'm talking, and I'm having trouble doing that and talk at the same time. Oops, I need to pull my other thing. Okay. But basically because of that, you can kind of take advantage of that and be able to, oops, I just shrunk this. We're now smaller. We're now bigger. Cool. All right. Okay. Line breaks. There we go. Put that in there. Let's pull a background. I'm interrupting myself, but I'm tracking down exactly what I'm looking for here. Beep-a-deep-a-doo. right, what am I going for? Okay. Okay. This is interesting. It's got a lot of basically the campaign. Basically, the quick start itself has some guidelines, but isn't exactly a okay. This is 100% box text type thing, which is cool. Means you got a little bit more to work with in terms of creativity and things like that. But it does mean, of course, you're going to have to uh basically you're going to have to basically do some work in terms of setting things up, talking with your players, and getting things ready. Um, kind of like when we were dealing with basically Blades in the Dark. Basically, it's kind of a similar idea. Basically, the idea of the fact that you're dealing with a situation that's a little bit more sandboxy, and so the game itself isn't going to necessarily spell everything out for you, but wants you to kind of basically fill in the gaps, put together stuff, do a little bit more legwork so that you can tailor it better to your player characters and what their goals are and what their desires are, rather than just railroading them necessarily directly into whatever plot it is you have set up. So for example, this one here, basically you're doing here's your high level 20,000 feet basically view. Okay, there's a rival bootlegger gang. Basically, it's muscling in on your territory. You belong to basically a gang which is run by basically this Nucky Johnson, and the player characters are going to have to deal with that. And so now it's a how do you basically, given what your player characters have set up as their ideas, as their goals, basically you can kind of get that feel for like, okay, are they basically, have they joined the gang for because they're in it for the money? Have they joined the gang because it's providing family or shelter or something like that, a basic need that these characters need filled, and that's why they're part of it? Are they trying to take down the gang from the inside, and so they've got conflicting motivations, and so therefore you're going to want to set this up as either an opportunity to backstab their organization or a chance to prove their worth so they could get deeper in order to do what they basically pull out their accomplishment, do what they want to accomplish. And so yeah, basically the game has got set up scenarios and situations. Basically that's basically how this basically you're going to want to basically it's going to be you're going to have to figure out what works best for your characters and what they've set up and how they want the adventure to continue, so that you can best keep the flow. This one basically obviously is set up for gangster characters. Obviously, if they're basically all your PCs decide they want to join the police registration, basically the Superhero Registration Act, powered registration, I believe is what it's called. Obviously this adventure isn't going to work, but there's obviously basically some requirements that you want to do. So basically how they have it set up in here is they kind of have they have a breakdown of here are things that can happen. Basically here's how we have things introducing. Basically you've got basically a couple different events that can move things forward in terms of the player, basically how you want to introduce the players to this threat here. You've got the standoff where basically some people are basically you've got the two rival sides staring each other down that the players walk into. You've got the shakedown where basically you're walking in on something going wrong, and so your player characters have to make the choice to how they want to step in. Or the babbling braggart, basically you're hanging out in the bar and some guy behind you is talking about, basically is starting to talk talk bad about your crew, and your player characters basically, this is the more traditional you're starting, everyone's starting at a bar type situation, and somebody's talking smack, basically talking smack. Wow, I've dated myself with that one. So basically, someone is basically talking big about about themselves and their chances to take down, uh, basically take down your gang, and your characters have to then decide how they want to deal with it. And so you have that choice. Talking smack isn't exactly 1920s parlance. Yeah, my brain is blanked on what like 1920s parlance would be. Um, basically for basically talking big. I haven't watched Guys and Dolls recently, so I'm not up on my fake gangster. Talking big was better, probably. Yeah, getting too big for his britches. Um, Coming in the chat with your favorite 1920s slangisms for talking basically getting big. So basically, how you could break down this quick start is obviously the events are going to be your easiest place to start. You're going to have those three different kind of events there. You're going to have your come back here. So we'll use the quick create to kind of sketch out basically these ideas here really quickly. So you've got we can actually call it standoff. We'll basically shakedown. Go down a club owner. Let's edit standoff here. Make it work like the rest of it. They want standoff. I always feel like does this have swing? Like I feel like I should basically. They don't have swing as an option on Pretzel. I'm disappointed. Why don't you have a swing station here? Everybody wants swing. I'm just listening to the music and I'm like, we just need to be more swing music as we're planning this out. And it's, yeah, well, we got Latin. Not quite the same. We got jazz. There we go. We'll switch that one. There is one track in jazz. Okay, we'll switch later. There we go. Alright, so basically, God, that'll be a thing if it ain't got that swing. Alright, day one standoff. Face off. Between Von Trier and I'll come back and basically do a little bit more on these later, so I'm just kind of going through and getting the basics in. Okay. Then moving on to day two, things start to escalate. Players start to have a little bit more agency in how they want to deal with it, as opposed to just walking into things. So they can trail the gang. So we'll go with that. Casing the joint. Checking out the warehouse. We also got that classic interrogation. And joining the gang. Just be doing a little undercover, but it's a little bit more subtle. And of course, once they've got basically, however they got the information, you always gotta go back and talk with the boss. Oof. Sorry to hear that. Bad luck on crashing twice there. Alright, that's just gonna repeat. As fun as that song was. Oh no, it actually has other songs. It was just lying when it said it had one track. Cool, fine. We'll let it keep going. Pretzel, why do you mess with me, Pretzel? Steal your brother's report. That's not delivered. Reporting in. To the boss. And of course, day 3. Oh, you want to deal basically taking care of the problem. The direct method. Wipe them all out. Maybe you want to be a little bit more diplomatic. Maybe you show up and want to negotiate a merger. The town ain't big enough for 2 of you, but there don't have to be 2 of you. What if there's just 1 of you? Or you can make them a little bit less useful. Can't spell financially. Rip. And last plan. Run them out of town. We can organize what's the name. It's slightly nicer. I could do that 1, 2, and 3. I could get those numbers. So, you can set up these events. You can basically, if you really want to just focus in on the events that are going to happen, setting them up like this, and then kind of going into each one and basically clarifying what happens. Like basically for standoff, for example, you're going to want to probably quickly create some of the NPCs you've got in here. Because you're going to be like, oh, okay, here's basically you've got the basically fellow gang members in your gang, fellow gang members in the other. So basically, you're going to want to quickly create those NPCs in here. Like, for example, we could just basically going through here, we could quickly create one of the big thugs with a great thug name here. Good old Brutus Howe. And give him one for the bruiser. He's a friendly giant, though. There we go. So, basically, setting that up. Then I can reference, basically, my characters. I can use the reference system. Bring him right in. Perfect. And if I want to, so I can keep building this out. I can throw those NPCs in there, stat them out at the events. But the important thing that I'm going to want to do is we've kind of gone through and we've detailed this, and I've talked a little bit about how I could say this takes place in a 1920s alley behind a bar, basically between a couple of warehouses down by the docks, etc., etc. I could give that, and most players are going to have a decent idea of what that means, because basically we've all seen docks in either basically in films or cartoons from the era, things like that. And so you're going to have a decent idea of, you're like, oh, okay, I think of it, basically players are like, okay, I think we can I think we can figure it out from there. But what I would encourage you to do, especially if it's your first time running a game like this, is superhero games, and even basically you can almost extend this to urban fantasy games in general, but superhero games especially. So let's call this the docks. So basically, we're down by the docks in Atlantic City, and so basically, I could give a cool description and things like that. I could look up the docks. I could basically pull up basically any description of docks, basically from either pull up a 1920s serial or short or something like that, or a movie, and basically take a look at it, describe what's there, and to give your players the basic breakdown of what it is. But the key thing you're going to want to do for a superhero type game is sprinkle in cool things, cool interactions that your players can immediately go, oh, okay. I basically said that I need to remember that that's there because my character could use that. Basically, I've got a telekinetic, so therefore the fact that there's a bunch of random pipes that he's described laying around over there, that could play into my powers later. Oh, hey, we're by the docks, and he's describing the waves crashing in just underneath. I can use that water to basically pull that water in and spray that water on people or things like that, or be able to jump into the water and basically throw people into the water. Things like that, or a probability mage who's going, oh, hey, what are the chances that crane breaks and falls and drops a big heavy crate, or that 1920s car which is just getting loaded off the dock. Basically, it just happens to be hanging precariously over the situation. Sprinkle in those details into the game so that your player basically write them down ahead of time. Go through basically, especially if you know your player characters, and you know what their powers are. Basically, give them those. Basically, you don't have to necessarily spell everything out. Basically, you don't have to be like, okay, here's the one thing for Bob, here's the one thing for Julie, here's the one thing for Sam, here's the one thing for basically here's the one thing for Stella. Cool. I've got 4 things and 4 powers. Cool. Basically, on some situations like the waves, you got a water-based elemental or something like that. Yeah, cool. Obviously, docks are going to be a better situation for them than something else. If you're in a storm, you basically weather manipulation, things like that work better outside than they do inside. But you could still sprinkle stuff in and be like, oh, okay, yeah, there are windows, which basically, oh, hey, there's a window to the outside here. The weather person could break those and have stuff blow in and things like that. But give your basically, and your players may ask for things as well, and so you're going to want to be flexible. You're not going to want to solidly set the situation in stone and describe in detail everything that's in the room or in the area. So your players are like, well, you didn't say there was a fire hydrant, you didn't say there was a stack of 2x4s, you didn't say there was basically a couple of stray dogs wandering around that I could manipulate to bite people, alley cats or something like that. You want your players to be like, oh, okay, I can ask for stuff, but you want them to feel comfortable with the idea of the fact that, oh, hey, this isn't just your typical D&D fight. This isn't just I throw a punch, I throw a blast, I throw whatever. Basically, I swing a sword, a stick, or a pipe, or I shoot a gun, and that's all I do, because that's basically, even though you're basically like, oh, I'm a superhero, but basically I'm just going to do that. Superhero fights should be big kind of epic things where you're ducking for cover behind cars, trash cans, boxes. Basically, you should be throwing boxes, cars, bending street lights, basically punching through, basically throwing people through walls or fences or other stuff. Getting that idea of the fact that, hey, the environment is part of this game as much as the player characters are. And if you give them those clues and hints in your initial description of the location, they're going to pick up on that and feel more like, oh, hey, yeah, he mentioned those bunch of pipes over there. Basically, he must want us to do something with them. I mean, basically, TTRPG players are famous for, oh, hey, the GM said something, therefore we have to pay attention to it. Therefore, take advantage of that fact and feed them things. Give them a little bit of a, oop, here you go. Here's a little hint. Here's a little clue as to what the situation could hold that they can then take and keep moving with. So basically, give yourself that read aloud, which is basically by the shore, or basically full of basically loading and unloading supplies. Rain. Listen. Oh, okay. Here. Fourth. Yeah, basically, so basically something like this. Obviously, you've got a couple of things. You've got the boxes. You've got crates and supplies. Basically, for ships, you've got the night to the car. Basically, you've got all of that. You've got all of this little setup that's in there that's not being like signposted and basically like that, but it gives the player a better idea of what's going on in a situation that they can take advantage of, that they can look into. They could be like, oh, okay, cool. Basically, obviously you've set up stuff, and basically I'm pulling some of this from Feng Shui, which is basically one of my favorite kind of action RPG basically things, because they love setting up, because they do their big thing is action set pieces, and so a lot of the time when they're giving basically a lot of their guides to, like, they're basically pulling up the movies, or basically some of their adventures or things like that, their setup books are, here's a video store, here's what can happen in the video store. You've got tapes, you've got cash registers, you've got TV showing things, you've got gumball machines, snack counters, things like that. Oh, okay, basically, so what, basically, and then they go through, and not only do they describe that, basically, they also give stuff like, basically, could around a thug, waited, and anchor into the water. I think basically you can come up with ideas for things that could happen. Basically, that if basically your player characters start asking you for, hey, what can I do with things like that? You've come up with some of these ideas in advance, and maybe you throw some of the technical details, basically like, 5 or 6 or something like that. Okay, so now I've got the, not only do I have the, okay, here's a cool thing I can have my characters do, my villains do, or the players start asking about it and they're looking around for stuff, something I can suggest to them. I've done a little bit of the thinking ahead of time to be like, oh, okay, cool. Basically, I can deal with the fact that I can be like, oh, okay, I know what the dice rolls are. But sorry, basically, I'm just checking something. But I know what the new dice rolls are, but I can deal with that ahead of time, and I've got that done with. I've got those numbers set basically in advance, so I'm not stopping and losing track of things and having to look up things, as it were. Immediately, basically, what it is, it's just an, oh, hey, cool, yeah, that happened. Keep things moving, keep things snappy, because a fun thing with superhero fights and things like that is you don't want your players to think, oh, every time I do something, it's this long, complicated process of sorting out all the dice roll, basically sorting out the difficulties, so basically figuring things out. Basically, there's a lot of basically, like, even, I think, basically, does this actually have it? Basically, a lot of good systems have just, hey, here are some sample difficulties for things that happened. Basically, for wild and wacky things. This one GM screen doesn't necessarily have it on it. But basically, coming up with those things, but it does have things like, hey, here's some basically how things are, basically how hard things are to hit. So you can see here. Basically, like, okay, here's some objects in terms of, okay, this is how hard things, basically, objects are to hit, basically how heavy they are, et cetera, basically how many blows it takes to blow through something, what are your typical explosions going to look like, things like that, and basically just setting those things up so that your player characters feel like, basically, things aren't going to necessarily be ultra complicated. People are willing to swing swords and fire guns and things like that because they're simple. It's a, yes, here's the basically, okay, basically you have a number to do it, draw the difficulty check, basically you're against this person's target thing. It's easy to do. Nobody has to stop and think about that. But when basically it's when everything grinds to a halt that they say, I want to grab him by the lapels and throw him through a wall. That if you stop and basically if it takes 20 minutes every time something like that happens to sort through all of the choices, players are going to be less interested in doing that. They're going to be less interested in basically because they're going to feel like, oh, I'm taking up all the time in this, et cetera. So get these things kind of in advance, get some of these ideas down, get some of the basically, or just record them as basically in notes, basically maybe in the session, or something like that. So you have those done ahead of time. Maybe just use an event, just have a combat event that just has a list of really cool combat abilities, things like that you've gotten done ahead of time that you could be like, oh, okay, cool. Let's just keep this going. Throwing somebody through a wall. Okay, here's the check I'm going to go through for that. Basically, here's my thought process for that, or for that, or for that. And basically just have those ready so that people feel like, oh, hey, yeah, we're having fun, we're doing things. And the system that they have in here is relatively straightforward. You've got a skill, you've got a stat, you've got a skill, you pick a target number based on how difficult it is, and you just go, have them draw cards. Pick a target number and go. There isn't a whole lot of pluses or minuses or things like that. You can add those in if they're doing something really cool, or they're doing something that you should succeed at, or if they're doing something absolutely ridiculous. You can apply those pluses and minuses if you really need to, but for the most part, it should be straightforward and things should keep moving. Because that's going to be your key for a fun kind of frantic, basically action kind of basically action situation that you want this to be. You want this to feel like it's basically like a gunfight. Basically, other than you have that tense moment at the beginning when you're doing the standoff, and then things explode, and people are getting thrown through walls and being blown up, and basically getting flung into the air, and wild animals are coming out of the woods and tackling people, and all sorts of crazy and wild stuff. And then basically it's going to calm down again, and you deal with the aftermath, and then you're going to explore and deal with all of that, negotiate, and then it's going to pick back up again the next time something is going to happen. And you're going to want all of that to basically kind of ebb and flow, but you want things to keep moving basically throughout, basically as everything keeps going. So all of that, basically, so that's basically having all of that set up is going to really make or break the experience. This is basically, again, basically as we saw from basically what I was showing you, there isn't a whole lot of heavy world building going on here. It's meant to be kind of more blades in the dark. Let your characters basically, because your power sets that your player characters are going to have is going to wildly change what type of adventure you're going to end up with. Session 0 is going to be key here for basically making sure you sit down with your players and find out what they're playing ahead of time and what type of games they want to play. And you can be kind of informing them and pushing them, like, if you have an idea where you're really like, I want you guys to be undercover supers dealing, basically you're basically pretending to be regular people, and you're trying to make your way through this thing and sneaking and things like that, and that's this great idea I have. Make sure your player characters aren't picking flashy and bombastic powers, and they're all going to be disappointed when you're like, oh no, you're not supposed to be using any of those, and they're like, oh, okay. On the flip side, if you decide to let your player characters kind of dictate it, and they all come in with basically subtle negotiation and mind powers and things like that, if you're constantly throwing them into fight after fight after fight, they're going to get tired. They'll be like, hey, you know what? When am I going to get to I want to do more negotiating. I want to do more charismatic things and things like that. Be aware of, okay, that's the situation that has been set up. Be aware of how that's going to play out and how that works, so that you can design the encounters. Like, basically, we just went through like all these events here. Obviously, some of these are going to work better for a more basically like shakedown. Basically, shakedown and standoff work much better for a fight-oriented kind of situation. Like, obviously, this is just pure, basically, definitely a fight showing up. Basically go with... Sorry, one second, I need to deal with this. And so dealing with basically getting that situation, basically you're going to be like, oh, okay, let me throw them, if they're more negotiating, more charismatic, let me throw them the loudmouth in the bar, then maybe the shakedown, then maybe the standoff. Let me deal with it that way. Or if you've got a balance, be like, okay, now I know I've got a balance. I can push these things basically one way or another. If it's basically like I can use the babbling braggart, and I don't have to necessarily have it end in a fist fight. If I know I've got characters who are going to be wanting to be more talky, so be less jump on the gun. Basically, as soon as someone talks to the guy who's mouthing off, he throws a punch. But have him be able to be talked to, listened to, manipulated, however you want to deal with it. Then maybe you're like, okay, now for basically, I do still want to have a fight, so they're going to walk into that standoff, and it's going to like, oh, okay, now it's a fight time. Basically, now they're going to be less likely to be talked down, because I want to kind of balance that between all of my characters and things like that. So basically, especially in a superhero game, it's really key to kind of look at what your players are building and what they want, or either giving them guidance as to what they should build, or looking at what they're building and using that to kind of that feedback loop of, okay, here's what I'm wanting you to build. This is they come back with, this is what we built. You're like, okay, let me modify. Here's the situations we're going to come up with. Here's the situations you're going to deal with because of that. And dealing with all of that, basically having that all set up, basically someone in advance using something like LoreLink is going to help you feel more comfortable in terms of, hey, I can run this, I can keep this going. Because otherwise, if you're just trying to wing it off the top of your head, it's basically, unless you're really good at improvising and you're really familiar with the system, you're going to run into stumbling blocks which are going to slow it down. And basically in a system like this, that's going to be less interesting for the players if things have been basically things are slowed down. Okay, so we're basically running technically a little bit over, but I also got over to a late start. But we will start to wrap it up here. So basically Capers. So this has been Capers by Nerdburger Games. And basically for other basically in terms of other things, basically a reminder that last week, like actually not last week, a couple weeks ago, basically we went through the Discworld quick start guide, and basically started looking at basically how to put the Discworld adventure quick start adventure up in smoke. Which you saw back on that front page there, right there. And so we are going to be reminded we're going to be playing that Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern. I always have to double check my calendar because I feel like at one point we started, maybe it's 12:30. I think it's 12:30. You know, I should check my schedules and things like that. You know, the things which actually start to stream. I should actually look at them. What a weird and wacky idea. It is at 1 p.m. Okay. 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, since we're now back on Standard Time. Yeah, the call time and it's going to go live time are always that's going to mess me up in my head because I have to sort two different times in my head. 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Show up here on Twitch, and you will be able to watch the LoreLink players go through the Up in Smoke quick starter campaign. Basically, I'm sorry, quick starter game for the Discworld. That is the Modiphius system, the new Modiphius system, which just came out. It's that simple kind of dice-based system. Basically, it should be basically where you are encouraged to take your traits and twist them as best as you can to try to get them to fit and give you a good, solid excuse for why your character would be good in this particular instance, even though maybe you wouldn't normally think they would. So it should be a lot of fun with puns and word twisting, and desperate clamors for things to try to make sense and keep going forward. With this group, I can already tell that this group is going to have a lot of fun with it. So be sure to show up for that at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, December 6th. And you can check that all out, and it'll be a lot of fun. You can see me using LoreLink to go through that series, and also just enjoy a nice, fun, light RPG during this holiday season. Next week, we will be back with actually, next week I am out because of Christmas season and holidays and parents and things like that. You'll be able to check 20, moderator of the stream, and LoreLink player going through and playing a video game. She will let you know what that game is at some point. Darkest Dungeon is the default, but maybe she'll come up with something different. You never know. It's up to her. She's going to be playing something fun, and you should show up to watch it. And then the week after that, I will be back for a cyberpunk Christmas. So we'll be playing I'll be looking through and planning a cyberpunk game out, either Shadowrun or Cyberpunk Red. I haven't really decided, but just know it's going to be a cyberpunk game. During this holiday season of spending and corporations, it's only appropriate that we look into the true meaning of the holiday, which is cyberpunk. That's not quite right. But it's about not necessarily dealing with capitalism as necessarily the reason for the season, and ways to deal with that. Then of course, after that, it'll be Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, which we have friends, we have family here at LoreLink, and so we will be taking those hours and hanging out with them and basically recharging our batteries so we can return fresh and renewed in January. So all of that to say, if you're curious about when will that happen, or what's going on, or what's happening at any given time, there are tons of ways for you to find out and be informed. Obviously, the first one, and one that we appreciate, is if you will follow this channel. You will get a notification whenever we go live, and so you'll be able to be like, oh, I forgot, they're starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday. You'll get a notification saying, hey, they've gone live. Or if we're running late, you don't have to sit here and wait for us to start. Twitch will send you a notification when I actually manage to click that go live button. Okay, so that's what that great follow button will do. Or, basically, if you're feeling particularly generous, you can take some of your hard-earned money and donate it to us. Or more appropriately, you could take some of Amazon's hard-earned money. See Cyberpunk. And you can basically take that and give that to us. You could use your free sub if you have an Amazon Prime account. Link it to your Twitch account, and be able to basically take that subscription, and basically donate that Jeff Bezos' yacht money to us, where we guarantee you we will not spend it on a yacht. After basically outside of that, if you're wanting to catch basically previous streams, like hey, they're doing the Discworld game. Maybe an in-game yacht. Yeah, that's probably the most that we might spend. We might purchase an in-game yacht DLC. Basically, after that, if you want to catch if you started late in this stream, or you want to catch some of those previous streams, like the Discworld games I talked about earlier, feel free to check out our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel, and you can basically see all of our past streams on there. Basically, if you're wanting a more direct method, you can check out our examples page, and that will also basically show you all the campaigns. Basically, yacht armor, yacht.exe, yacht.wad. If it's a Doom map, maybe it's a Doom map of a yacht. You could download, basically, you wouldn't download a car, but maybe you would download a yacht. Who knows? So you can get you can like and subscribe over on YouTube if you wanted to let us know that you're watching and enjoying over there. And of course, if you're wanting to get even more updates before the fact, basically ahead of time, you could check out our Blue Sky account, and that will give you up-to-date information about what's going on, cool things which are happening, and fun conversation starters, like cool ideas over basically cool RPG ideas and things like that. All of that basically is available on our Blue Sky account. And if you're like, hey, I don't want to basically, I'd like to be kept informed, but I don't want to deal with, say, social media, because, 'tis the season for not dealing with social media. Basically, completely understandable. And we do have a newsletter, which will just send you once a month, get you an update on what's going on with Lorelink, what happened in the last month, what's going on in the next month. We'll send it to you just once a month. We won't even spam you. I think at most we've sent maybe two, maybe once. I think we may have got up to 3 when we were really excited during the Kickstarter. Outside of that, you can do all of those things basically via our account, basically via the newsletter, basically, hey, Streamlabs, thanks for catching up and basically double spamming us. Oh wait, that's the YouTube thing. That's why it's showing up twice. It's fine. Actually, no, I think it's just triple spamming. Awesome. It's really important. Streamlabs wants you to come and subscribe to our newsletter. Don't disappoint Streamlabs. And of course, last of all, and probably greatest of all, and I'm not leaving it to basically, I'm not just leaving it last because I technically forgot about it. If you are interested in Lorelink, this thing I have been demonstrating all this time, you'll be happy to know Lorelink's available for free. You can get a free, basically, you can join our basically membership at our free tier, and be able to get all of the information, basically all of the things that you see, are basically available for free right there, basically in Lorelink. You can check out basically creating campaigns. You get 2 free campaigns, basically events, timelines, sessions, locations, players. All of that stuff is available to you on your free account. And if you know somebody who has a paid account, your free account will let you join their games via the player sharing system. So all of that is available for free via basically, you can check that out at that link right there. Now all that said, and I think I've gotten all the beats. I thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening, whether you're watching live or watching later. Thank you so much, and hope you have a good December. Happy your Thanksgiving was happy. You have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, however you celebrate. And we will catch you all next week. Farewell. Oh, not next week. Friday. God. I need notifications to keep myself straight. Thanks for watching.